It all started with a simple request from the HOA. When they asked for the keys to my private gate, I figured it was no big deal. After all, it seemed like a simple request that wouldn't change anything in my life. But I was wrong. That one small interaction set off a chain of events that uncovered years of corruption and deception, hiding right under my nose. I had just moved into my house by the lake. The place was peaceful, exactly what I needed. A quiet, private spot away from the chaos of the world. The lakefront path behind my home was mine, and I had put up a gate to keep it that way. People had been using that path for years without any thought about the owner's privacy, so I finally decided to put a stop to it. I wanted to enjoy my property without dealing with trash and strangers walking through my yard every weekend. I thought the gate would be the end of it. But then, the HOA showed up. Jennifer Wilson, the president of the HOA, stood on my porch with a look that screamed trouble. She wasn't asking for a favor. She was demanding that I give them a key to my gate so the community could have quicker access to the lake. I tried to explain that it was my property and my right to keep it private, but she wasn't hearing it. That conversation turned into something bigger than I ever expected. Little did I know, this small disagreement would spark a battle that would take me down a road filled with threats, secrets, and corruption within my own community. It wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about everything that had been going on right under our noses, things people had kept hidden for far too long. Maple Springs was a quiet, well-kept neighborhood, at least on the surface. It was the kind of place where people waved at each other from their driveways, but mostly kept to themselves. The HOA had always been there, sending out newsletters about lawn maintenance and organizing holiday decorations. At first, I didn't have any major issues with them. I paid my dues, followed the basic rules, and minded my own business. But over the years, the HOA had become more involved in things that didn't seem like their business. It started small, extra fees here and there, new rules about paint colors, and fines for things like leaving a trash can out a few hours too long. I noticed how people just accepted it, not wanting to make trouble. I should have seen the warning signs, but I figured as long as I wasn't breaking any rules, they'd leave me alone. That was before the gate. My house backed up to a lake, and there was a narrow path leading down to the water. The problem was, people acted like it was a public walkway, cutting through my yard without a second thought. At first, I tried to be patient, but it got worse. People would leave beer bottles in my grass, toss trash near the fence, and sometimes even let their dogs run loose. One morning, I woke up to a stranger fishing right off my property like he belonged there. That was the last straw. I put up a locked gate to stop the trespassing. I thought that would be the end of it. Then, one afternoon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the camera and saw Jennifer Wilson, the HOA president, standing outside. She wasn't alone. Another board member, Robert, stood beside her with his arms crossed. Something about the way they were standing made me uneasy, but I opened the door anyway. Jennifer didn't waste time with small talk. She got straight to the point. She wanted a key to my gate. She said the HOA had received complaints that I was blocking access to the lake and that I needed to let the community through. I was caught off guard. "This is private property," I told her. "The path isn't public." But she just smiled like I was a child who didn't understand the rules. She said the HOA had final say over issues that affected the community and that I was making things harder for everyone. I stayed calm, but I made it clear that I wasn't handing over a key. I even mentioned that I had checked my property deed and confirmed that the land was mine. That's when her expression changed. She took a deep breath and gave me a look that made my stomach drop. "You know," she said slowly, "we take violations very seriously. I'd hate for this to turn into a bigger issue." That's when I realized this wasn't just a request, it was a threat. After my conversation with Jennifer, things started to escalate quickly. I had no idea just how far the HOA was willing to go, so I decided to take some precautions. I installed security cameras around my property to make sure I could document anything strange that might happen. I wasn't expecting much, but it felt like the right thing to do. I figured that if the HOA wanted to push this any further, I'd have the proof to back myself up. A few nights later, I got a security alert on my phone. I froze when I saw what the cameras had captured. There were 3 figures near my back gate. As I zoomed in, I recognized Jennifer, Robert, and Michael, the same people who had come to my door. They were trying to break into my property using bolt cutters. It was clear they were trying to get past my gate to access the lake, just like they'd demanded. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I immediately called the police and showed them the footage. The officer who arrived was calm but serious, telling me that this was definitely a case of attempted trespassing and vandalism. He advised me to keep documenting everything in case it went to court. As if the situation wasn't already tense enough, the HOA started firing back. They sent me a series of violation notices, each one for something minor, like my hedge being a few inches too high, my mailbox color being a shade too dark, and even for how much water I was using to water my garden. It was obvious to me that these were retaliatory actions, petty fines meant to intimidate me into giving in. The more I refused to cooperate, the more they seemed determined to make my life difficult. It didn't stop there. The HOA took their retaliation public. Jennifer posted an announcement on the neighborhood community app, calling an emergency meeting to discuss the issue of blocked lake access. She painted me as the villain, claiming that I was being selfish and trying to destroy a historic community path. I was blindsided. It felt like the entire neighborhood was turning against me. I started getting text messages from neighbors asking if it was true that I was blocking the lake, and some even hinted that I was a troublemaker. The worst part was that no one had asked me for my side of the story. The smear campaign took its toll. The more I saw people whispering behind my back, the more I realized how much influence the HOA had over public opinion. I started to feel completely isolated. It was clear that they were trying to rally the community against me, and with the way things were going, I feared I wouldn't be able to fight back alone. As the emergency meeting drew closer, I decided I had to be prepared. I reached out to my lawyer for help, gathering all the evidence. I had the security footage, the violation notices, and the app post. I knew this wasn't just a small disagreement anymore. It was a fight for my rights. And if I wanted to stand a chance, I had to make sure I was ready for whatever the HOA threw my way. I couldn't let them win without a fight. At this point, I knew I had to dig deeper. The HOA wasn't just pushing their authority. They were actively trying to take my private property. I decided to visit the county clerk's office to make sure my property deeds were in order. I wanted to see for myself if there was anything in writing that could back up the HOA's claim. When I explained my situation to the clerk, he gave me a knowing look, like he'd heard something like this before. As he pulled up the records, he pointed to the original property survey. It clearly showed that my land, including the path leading to the lake, was private property. There was no legal reason for the HOA to demand access. But then he hesitated before speaking again. He told me, almost offhandedly, that this wasn't the first time the HOA had tried to alter property records. A few years back, they had attempted to rezone parts of the neighborhood to claim certain areas as community land, but it never went through. That was all I needed to hear. They had been trying to do this for years. I left the office with copies of my property documents, even more determined to protect what was mine. I spent the next few days documenting everything, taking pictures of the gate, my property lines, and every violation notice the HOA had sent me. But just when I thought I was ahead of them, things escalated again. One morning, I stepped outside and immediately noticed something was off. When I got to the back gate, my stomach dropped. The lock was gone. In its place was a brand new lock, one that I hadn't put there. Taped to the gate was a note that read, "Community access restored." My hands were shaking as I yanked at the lock. They had broken onto my property, removed my lock, and replaced it with their own. They were acting like this was their land now. I didn't hesitate. I called the police. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was vandalism and trespassing. When the officer arrived, I showed him everything. The missing lock, the note, my property deed. He nodded as he took notes, saying this was a clear case of criminal trespass. I told him I wanted to press charges. Enough was enough. And then, something unexpected happened. My elderly neighbor, Grace, who lived across the street, knocked on my door later that afternoon. She held up a small SD card and told me she had something I needed to see. Grace loved bird watching and had security cameras set up near her backyard feeders. One of those cameras had caught everything the moment Jennifer, Robert, and another HOA board member arrived in the middle of the night, broke my lock, and installed their own. She told me she had lived in this neighborhood for over 30 years, and she had seen the HOA bully plenty of people. But this time, she wasn't going to stay quiet. Grace's video changed everything. When I started telling a few neighbors what had happened, they started sharing their own stories. People who had been fined hundreds of dollars for minor rule violations. People who had been threatened with lawsuits for small infractions, suddenly, they weren't so willing to side with the HOA anymore. With the video evidence and growing support from my neighbors, my lawyer drafted a cease and desist letter, warning the HOA that legal action was coming if they didn't stop. What had started as a fight over my gate had turned into something bigger. The HOA wasn't just after my property, they were abusing their power over the entire community. And now, people were finally ready to fight back. The night of the emergency HOA meeting arrived, and I knew this was my chance to finally confront Jennifer and the rest of the board. My lawyer and I walked into the community center, ready for whatever they threw at us. The room was packed with neighbors who were clearly waiting to hear what would happen next. I could feel the tension in the air. Jennifer was already at the front, holding the microphone with a stern look on her face. The moment she saw me, I could see her shoulders tense. She immediately tried to shut things down, claiming that this was a private homeowners meeting and that only residents in good standing were allowed to attend. But my lawyer was ready. He stepped forward and calmly explained that, as a homeowner, I had every right to be there, and I had legal counsel with me. The room went quiet. Some people seemed confused, and others, like me, were starting to see that Jennifer's tactics weren't as clean as they seemed. Jennifer wasn't done, though. She insisted that the meeting was necessary to address an urgent community issue, my gate and the path to the lake. But as she spoke, a few neighbors started whispering. Thomas, one of my neighbors, stood up, interrupting her. He started talking about something no one had expected. Thomas revealed that the HOA had been charging homeowners extra fees for the maintenance of the lake access path, even though it wasn't community property at all. It was my private land. He pointed out that they had been collecting money for years for something they didn't own. The room exploded into murmurs and whispers. People were starting to realize just how deep the HOA's deception ran. This wasn't just about a gate. It was about money, lies, and power. As the crowd grew louder, the doors of the room swung open, and Officer Reynolds walked in with a couple of other officers. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Officer Reynolds stepped up to the front, and in a calm but firm voice, announced that an investigation was underway regarding the vandalism and trespassing at my property. He showed the community the evidence, the footage of the HOA board members tampering with my lock, and the physical pieces of the destroyed lock that had been found. The tension in the room was palpable as the realization hit that this was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It was a criminal case. Jennifer tried to regain control, but it was too late. The board's attempt to cover up their actions began to unravel. Community members started demanding answers, asking why they had been lied to for so long, and questioning how their money had been misused. I stepped forward and, with the evidence in hand, accused Jennifer and the board of embezzling funds. I explained how the HOA had been charging for maintenance on land they didn't own, while lining their own pockets. The room erupted. Neighbors were furious. It was no longer just my fight. It was a fight for the entire community. Jennifer's confidence cracked, and for the first time she didn't have an answer. The police officers stepped in, taking charge of the situation. They promised that the investigation would continue, and that everyone involved in the vandalism and the financial fraud would be held accountable. In that moment, I realized how far the HOA had gone to control us all. But now, the truth was out, and the community was finally seeing things for what they were. The board members were trapped, and it was clear that their hold on the neighborhood was slipping fast. As the meeting ended, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. This battle wasn't over yet, but it was turning in our favor, and it felt good to know that we weren't going to let them get away with it any longer. After the meeting, the legal wheels began to turn quickly. The district attorney filed criminal charges against Jennifer and the other HOA board members for fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. The investigation uncovered just how deep the corruption went, revealing that the board had been stealing money from residents for years, including the fake fees for maintaining the private path. Some of the highest-ranking figures in the community were involved, and it became clear that the HOA had been abusing its power to line their own pockets. The community was stunned by how far they had gone. As the legal process unfolded, the neighborhood began to heal. The funds that had been taken were recovered, and the HOA was forced to take responsibility for its actions. A new board was elected, one made up of residents who cared about the community and wanted to restore fairness. Grace, who had been bullied by the HOA for years, was voted in as part of the new board. Her years of experience in dealing with the HOA's unfair practices made her a strong and reliable voice for the community. Thomas, who had helped expose the financial fraud, used his accounting skills to ensure that the HOA's finances were transparent and above board from that point forward. Looking back, I realized how much this journey had changed me. What started as a small fight over a gate had turned into something much bigger. It wasn't just about standing up for my rights anymore. It was about standing up for everyone in the community who had been pushed around by the HOA. I thought I was just protecting my home, but in the end, I helped bring justice to a whole neighborhood. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I wasn't sure if I could keep going, but the support from my neighbors kept me going. We had all fought together for what was right, and we won. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that the truth had a power that no one could ignore. When you stand firm against injustice, even when the odds are against you, you can make a difference. The gate dispute might have sparked the whole thing, but the real victory was for the entire community. Things were changing for the better. The new HOA was fair, transparent, and actually worked for the people, not against them. The sense of trust that had been lost was slowly being rebuilt, and the neighborhood felt like a community again. There was hope for the future, and that felt like a win in itself. The changes in the neighborhood were obvious. People were coming together, talking more, and genuinely caring about what happened next. As I walked down to the lake one evening, I could see the difference. The future felt brighter, not just for me, but for everyone who had been impacted by the HOA's greed. I closed the gate behind me and smiled, knowing that it wasn't just a gate anymore. It was a symbol of the fight we had all fought together. A fight for what was right.